The Nairobi courtroom fell completely silent. As the judge's gavel came down, its echo carrying the weight of history. Kenya's government had breached its own constitution by collaborating in the secret abduction of Nigerian activist Nnamdi Kanu on Kenyan soil, thousands of miles away. President Tinubu fumed in fury, while Peter Obi, a rare smile crossing his face, demanded Kanu's immediate release. But for Nnamdi Kanu himself, still held in solitary confinement in Abuja, this ruling was far more than just a courtroom victory. It was the first crack in a wall erected from betrayal, secrecy, and executive overreach. And now, across Nigeria, one haunting question rose above all else. When the law chooses justice over power, what happens to a regime built on its denial? In a quiet Nairobi street in June 2021, Nnamdi Kanu stepped out of his apartment, unaware of the shadows closing in around him. Two unmarked black SUVs cut him off. Masked men jumped out, no badges, no warning. In seconds, he was blindfolded, handcuffed, and pushed inside. It wasn't Kenyan police, they were Nigerian intelligence agents operating in Kenya, under unofficial deals, hidden by smiles and silence. For days, Kanu was held in a private house, with no access to family, no legal representation, no charges, only threats and profound isolation. Then came the private jet, no commercial terminal, no paperwork, just a hidden airstrip and a forced flight to Abuja. When the plane landed and the story broke, Nigerian officials falsely claimed Kanu had been duly rearrested after fleeing justice. But there had been no extradition order, no judicial procedure, just a man kidnapped in broad daylight and spirited across international borders with both governments pretending ignorance. Now, in Nairobi's courtroom, the truth stood unmasked. The arrest, detention, and transfer of Mr. Nnamdi Kanu from Kenyan soil in June 2021 violated the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya and international law, the judge declared, adding that Kenya must compensate him and that his detention in Nigeria had no legal foundation. The courtroom froze. Years of delay, concealment, and doubt lay exposed when once whispered suspicions became undeniable. Hard facts printed in irrevocable black and white. This was a decisive blow not just to those who abducted Kanu, but to the secretive forces enabling such power plays. In Abuja, the ruling hit like lightning. Phones buzzed. Emails flooded inboxes. President Tinubu flew into a rage. "This is an insult," he snarled, slamming the ruling across the table so forcefully that his aides jumped. To him, this wasn't about legal technicalities. It was a smear on Nigeria's sovereignty and reputation, and worse, it handed Kanu a rare moral victory. The president barked orders at his national security advisor. "We will appeal immediately. I want a legal team in Nairobi by tomorrow." But when his advisor cautioned that the verdict applied solely to Kenyan conduct, Tinubu cut him off. "Don't quibble, this strengthens Kanu's narrative. If we don't crush it, we'll pay in 2027." Downstairs, the denizens of Abuja's political world bristled with tension. The court ruling was trending across social media. Kanu's supporters quietly celebrated. Pressure was building. "If Kenya wants to play these games," Tinubu growled as he departed, "they'll learn one thing. Nigeria does not bow to Nairobi courtrooms." In Lagos, Peter Obi faced a small group of reporters. His tone was calm, his resolve crystalline. "I have read the Kenyan court's ruling," he began, allowing the weight of each word to settle into the room. The cameras leaned in. The moment hung in the air. What happened to Nnamdi Kanu was wrong. No lawful extradition, no proper hearing, no legal basis, only the weight of power used against a single man. And that is what a true miscarriage of justice looks like. His words were more than a legal statement, they were a moral reckoning. They spoke not just to Kanu's ordeal, but to the broader crisis facing Nigeria when governance forgets the rule of law. And as the world watched, one question lingered, spoken softly yet unmistakably. What happens when the law decides, finally, to uphold justice over power? He remained resolute as he faced the cameras that day, every word chosen with care and conviction. "A man seized in the cover of night and held without resolution. That is not justice. That is power unchecked." He paused deliberately, then fixed his gaze on the journalists. "No democracy locks away its voices, it listens to them." His tone grew stronger. "We cannot claim to lead Africa while trampling on the foundations that build a nation: due process, the rule of law, respect for human rights. I say it now, it's time to release Nnamdi Kanu." The gasp that swept through the press room was electric. It was the first instance a high-profile political figure had spoken so plainly of releasing Kanu. Obi did not flinch. I don't support violence or division, he continued, voice steady and unwavering. But I stand for fairness. If we continue to imprison dissent instead of listening to it, we are no longer a democracy, we are something far worse. His phone buzzed incessantly before he left messages of praise, urgent warnings, even outright threats, but by then, Obi had already made his choice. He understood that speaking out would make him a target, but silence was no longer an option. Now, the question before the nation was no longer about Kanu alone, it was about the very soul of Nigeria, and what it stood for in the eyes of its own people. Kanu's night cell, after nearly 4 years of confinement, became witness to a subtle, yet powerful transformation. Tiny and windowless, lit by a single flickering bulb, it had once been a space of crushing silence. Guards monitored every inch. Kanu's world was measured in footsteps and the click of keys behind locked doors. Then one morning, everything changed. A guard slid a folded newspaper under the bars. No words, no fanfare, just the headline: Kenya court rules abduction of Kanu illegal. His breath caught. He read the sentence again, then a third time. The article was brief, but precise. Kenya's courts had declared his seizure unconstitutional, an affront to international law, and held the government responsible for its clandestine role. That proclamation landed in his hands like a lifeline. He let the newspaper fall into his lap, leaned back, and closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he smiled. It was not the smile of triumph, it was the smile of survival. He rose and paced the narrow room. The chain on his ankle clinked softly, yet that sound no longer weighed on him. They tried to erase me, he murmured to himself, but now, even the law remembers. Rigid guards paused to observe him through the slit of the door. Noticing something they hadn't seen before, he looked unbowed, whole. Kanu approached the dusty wall where he'd once counted days. With a fingertip, he etched a single word into the grime: hope. Meanwhile, halfway around the world in Nairobi, a retired intelligence officer spoke in hushed tones, wanting to remain anonymous. He confessed that the planning for Kanu's abduction had begun with a call from Abuja in early 2021. Nigeria's intelligence apparatus had grown uneasy with Kanu's rising profile and organizing power. Kenya was selected, and certain officials quietly gave the green light. No extradition, no paperwork, just diplomatic cover, a private team, and surveillance. In exchange, promises were made: oil agreements, intelligence sharing, offshore payments. Both governments believed the operation would be invisible, but the ruling in Nairobi shattered that secrecy. They didn't just take a man, the officer whispered. They sold a part of our soul. In a glass-walled room at The Hague, an international team of human rights lawyers had been tracking the case for years. Now, armed with the Kenyan verdict, they were ready to act. This is no longer a national matter, it's a violation of human rights, one said. Another voice chimed in. This is precisely why the International Court of Justice exists, to hold states accountable when they break international law. Working rapidly, they assembled records, flight logs, court documents, witness affidavits. Within days, they filed a complaint against both Nigeria and Kenya, demanding Kanu's release, reparations, and international accountability. Back in Abuja, quiet panic was spreading through Tinubu's inner circles. The president's advisors warned, a legal earthquake is coming. President Tinubu brushed off warnings with a dismissive wave. We won't answer to foreigners, he declared with a conviction he believed was strength. But continents away, in The Hague, legal teams were already preparing international petitions. In courtrooms from Johannesburg to Brussels, one truth grew impossible to deny: justice knows no borders. What began in a dusty prison cell in Nairobi had now rippled across the world, shaking institutions and embassies alike. This wasn't just about Nnamdi Kanu anymore, it was about the rules of power and who, finally, is forced to obey them. Inside Aso Rock, calm had evaporated. Leaked confidential memos began to surface, first among journalists, then on social media. One memo, authored by Tinubu's own campaign strategist, was blunt: the continued detention of Nnamdi Kanu may irreparably damage your 2027 re-election bid. Another aide warned, Kanu is no longer just a prisoner. Every day he stays behind bars, your image shrinks and his grows. Cracks deepened within the administration. Some ministers pressed for Kanu's release, hoping to frame it as a gesture of reconciliation. Others feared it would expose Tinubu's weakness. But one reality loomed large: the southeast, once a contested but crucial region, was slipping away. Even moderate voices were growing restless. How do we preach unity while imprisoning voices like Kanu's? One memo read. He was kidnapped. Mr. President, the world knows it now. Tinubu sat in silence, tapping his fingers against his desk. Outside his office, loyal allies avoided press cameras. Inside, meetings grew tense, smiles thinner. The man who once called himself the last lion of Lagos now looked cornered and alone. A junior staffer whispered in a hallway, "He thinks holding Kanu makes him strong, but it's making him smaller." Publicly, Tinubu maintained his silence about the Nairobi ruling, but inside, pressure mounted with every leak, every memo, every glance from his increasingly fatigued cabinet. The president wasn't just losing control of the narrative, he was becoming the antagonist in it. Yet behind bars, Nnamdi Kanu's voice carried further than ever. In Enugu, someone spray-painted a wall with his words, "The chains may hold my body, but they cannot hold the truth." In Owerri, students scribbled his quotes into their notebooks. In Nsukka, a lecturer closed class with, "If justice is delayed, freedom is only borrowed." Across Nigeria, his name once spoken only in whispers was now sung in classrooms, written on t-shirts and painted on murals. A senator from the southeast murmured during a committee meeting, "We must talk about Kanu." No one stopped him. The taboo had cracked. A viral video soon swept through the internet. A young child reciting one of Kanu's quotes during a school assembly. "No people become free by begging. They become free by knowing who they are." That clip was viewed over 5 million times in a single week. In his prison cell, Kanu couldn't see these shifts, but he could feel the air changing. The guards were quieter, the newspapers less censored. One even carried a photo of a mural, painting of his face under the caption, "You can cage a man, but not his message." That's when the truth crystallized. They hadn't silenced him, they had elevated him. The man they tried to bury had become a seed, and the people were watering it with conviction, with courage, with hope. As dawn broke over Abuja, long shadows stretched across the high walls of the prison where Kanu was held. The silence inside was heavy, but outside, the world moved fast. The Nairobi court ruling had ripped open a wound in Africa's political landscape, and it wasn't healing. Legal petitions rolled in, human rights groups rallied, diplomatic channels buzzed from Europe to West Africa. And a new question began to echo in Nigeria: not if Kanu would be released, but what would happen when he was. Would his freedom spark unity or unravel decades of political stitching? Would he call for peace or return to the rhetoric of separation? Would Nigeria face its history or bury it deeper? President Tinubu, defiant as ever, weighed his options. Releasing Kanu could signal weakness, but holding him risked something worse: the slow erosion of trust, of legitimacy, of the very thread keeping Nigeria's diverse fabric intact. Meanwhile, Peter Obi remained composed. "Let the courts guide us," he said. "Let justice lead, not fear." In his small cell, Kanu waited not with desperation, but with resolve. He knew his name had grown larger than any cell could contain, larger than politics, larger than borders. He closed his eyes and whispered the word he'd etched into the wall weeks before: hope. But he also knew hope alone wasn't enough. A reckoning was coming, and when that cell door finally opened, it wouldn't just be Kanu stepping into the light, it would be a nation standing face to face with itself, forced to answer one question: what kind of freedom do we really believe in? If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories shaping Africa's future. Comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from, because your voice matters. Justice, truth, and freedom begin with awareness. Let's keep this conversation alive, together.